Tuesday. It's nice to hear all of the doorbells with everybody coming in. So once again, welcome to part one of 2 trainings. The next one next Thursday, November 2nd, on how we are using data and hoping to help you use data to advance economic equity for survivors. I am Sarah Wee. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm CSAJ's Director of Research and Programs. And I'm joined today by our data analyst and dashboard partner and all things data extraordinaire and many other things, Portia. Portia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to kind of dive into the world of dashboards that we have with everyone. My name is Portia Stigger, and you see her pronouns. And as Sarah has said, I've been working with CSAJ and the team to build out these dashboards. And I come from a couple of different worlds, like worked in the federal government and now, primarily working with in the nonprofit space. So.
Thanks so much. And we want to know who you are as well. This is part webinar, but we hope we set it up as a meeting so that we hope that you will hop off mute and share out loud what you're thinking. Also use the chat. So if you don't mind introducing yourselves in the chat, your name, pronouns, your role, where you're located, and also, because we'll be bringing this up, what is your vision of safety, or what's required for safety for you? We ask this question a lot, whether we're working with individuals, organizations, or at the systems and policy level like we're doing today. So I'm really curious to hear that, and it'll come up later. Also, let us know if you have had a chance to peruse the dashboard, or if this is sort of your entree into learning more about it so that you can peruse it. So if folks could introduce themselves in the chat, that would be great. Also, really encourage you to use the reactions button, send us an emoji. If you hear something you like, put a plus mark or some exclamation point in the chat. Give us feedback of how you're feeling, how things are resonating with you. Don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to be monitoring them. We'll be taking a break midway through and trying to save some time at the end for discussion and set up our time together next week. So excited to see some of you introducing yourself. So thanks so much. Keep that coming. Here are aims for both trainings. Over the next 2 weeks, we really hope that you'll be able to answer a little bit for yourselves what data is in the dashboard, why that data, what's the census and other national data got to do with it, with the work that we're doing, and how can I use the dashboard and this data to inform my advocacy, be it informing your programming or direct advocacy or policy work. So that's what we're hoping to cover. And here's our agenda. I think, Portia, you're gonna.
Yes, I'm gonna go through the agenda. So just to kind of give everyone the scope of what we're covering today. So, anyone can experience intimate partner violence, but not all survivors have access to what they need to get and stay safe. So policy and other decision makers often look at individual risk factors to IPV, for example, age, history of abuse, and individual behavior towards safety without looking at the neighborhood and structural factors that put safety out of reach, things like high and inequitable poverty, job and housing instability, unequal access to services. So as a result, we expect survivors to get safe and establish economic security quickly in environments with scarce resources and support, especially folks from historically oppressed communities. And so we're trying to use data, which is a very powerful tool to illustrate this inequity and create change. So what we're hoping to do in these 2 sessions, starting today, is to paint a picture of the inequitable safety landscapes and that will help us agitate for policy and system change in each state. So we're going to explore the link between structural inequity and IPV and what data can be used to illustrate that. we are going to get familiar, and I apologize in advance for this, we're going to get really into the weeds of the U.S. Census, the available data, and explore how we can access that. And then we're going to share out and sort of discuss the data that are in CSAJ's seed dashboards and how to use it. And then we'll kind of build on that for the next session by practicing using dashboards and going through some use cases to figure out how we can inform directly and policy and advocacy using samples that we've identified sort of in the first session. And then talk about data gaps and identify critical data needs to fuel advocacy for survivor economic equity.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off. First, going to lay a little groundwork for why we built the dashboard and how we identified data to be included in it, and start by kind of making the connection to social determinants of safety. First, I'm going to take a step back and even take a step back further. I asked you all to introduce yourselves, and we are recording, and we know that we want you to show up how you best need to show up. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot going on in the world right now, globally and locally. We were just talking before we hopped on about the mass shooting in Maine. So make sure that you take care of yourselves however you need to. We hope that this session is informative and that you feel like you can contribute to it, and also want to make sure that just acknowledge what's happening and make sure that you take some time to show up how you need to, and take care of yourself and yours. So with that, just to, like I said, to take a step back and situate where we are first, this dashboard is part of a larger effort, which is funded by the All-State Foundation, and a project, our Mapping and Advancing Equity project, which is a large effort. The dashboard is just one initiative meant to help build the capacity of the domestic violence field to engage precisely in systems change advocacy to address racial and economic inequity facing survivors. This project started, we launched it about a year ago, but it's really built off of years of working with you and folks like you in the field on enhancing survivor economic security. And from that work, we knew that we not only had to turn our sights to policy and systems change because the economic barriers that were showing up were linked to such big economic and social policy issues, but also that we needed to organize alongside you and the entire field to make that change possible. In that work, we really heard two things: that we needed a survivor-defined direction. So what is our vision? What is policy change we need? How should we be defining safety? So I asked how you all individually define safety. What should our collective vision of safety look like? So we're engaged in an effort to build a national policy platform, and we'll be releasing that actually in the next month or so. So stay tuned for that. We also heard that you all and that we need data, as specific as we can get it, data that can help illustrate these inequities and that can be used in the different kinds of change making. And so that is really what created the impetus for this data dashboard. So we're starting here, looking at safety as a structural inequity. A common mission statement of many of our organizations is something like, ensuring that everyone can live a life free of violence. But the reality is that safety is inequitable. And so while the distinction between what causes violence and what creates safety can seem slight, it really shifts our entire gaze in some important and dramatic ways. It shifts it from looking at what individual survivors do with scarce resources to asking why are there scarce resources, or in other words, looking at the environments that they're trying to seek safety within and whether that's possible, regardless of what they do. And it shifts it from not only looking at the individual and interpersonal nature of violence, but how safety is structured in our communities and in our states, and how we might restructure it to better serve survivors. So these are the 3 points that I'm going to make that kind of showed us or laid the evidence base for safety as an inequity, and pointed us to data that could illuminate it. And from there, that was the data that we pulled into the dashboard and hope to be using alongside you. So to start, first, we know that safety is an economic issue, and we know that our economy is inequitable. In fact, it's so precarious that nearly all 99% of those who experience intimate partner violence report economic abuse. So harm doers know the impact of messing with someone's financial situation and economic status, and may in fact be experiencing the violence of poverty, economic hardship, and other social inequity themselves. We also know that while individuals can create economic insecurity, systems really create long-term and lasting economic disadvantage. And we think about economic disadvantage as the ways that safety or options for safety are put out of reach of certain folks. We all feel it in very real ways, how a seemingly small thing, losing a job, a house, even besides violence, illness, a death in the family, needing to move, can ripple into really long-lasting economic hardship. And we've worked with this idea of the ripple effect over the years to show what that looks like for survivors' lives. This economic ripple effect of violence was something that we developed based way back in 2013, based on conversations with survivors and advocates, which really illustrates a few things: the specific types of economic needs that surface throughout one's life, and the ways that both individuals can create economic security, but also the ways that systems put, as I mentioned, safety out of reach. And oftentimes what we heard is it's put out of reach precisely because safety costs money and requires resources that policies, systems, or politics don't want to give or offer. And so this really creates economic disadvantage that lasts a long time, and ironically requires survivors, frankly, to have to give up the very safety they seek and need to pursue safety as it's defined and structured and made available in our communities and states. And we all know this shouldn't be the reality, but it is, and research shows that poverty is associated with intimate partner violence, and that those from historically oppressed communities are more likely to be impoverished. So these two charts kind of show the top being rates of intimate partner violence, the bottom chart being rates of poverty, that we can look at the national trend, that line cutting through the data, but they have similar trends and disparities in rates of violence and poverty, which says a lot about who can access safety, where they can access it, and why the impact of violence is so disproportionate. So this led us to really look at what's the definition of inequity, which you see here. Safety is an inequity because we can think of it as an unfair circumstance in that not everyone can get it. That results in or ripples into additional and unequal life outcomes. So this got us curious about what are the specific circumstances that play a role in one's ability to get safe, and could we find data that speaks to this environment, especially in a world where data on survivors can be limited, at least when thinking about representative data at a state level. So this brings us to number 2, that safety is certainly individual. It's as diverse as all of us are, but it's not private, or it's not only our private responsibility or personal responsibility to obtain. It's a structural issue precisely because how states create opportunity or set up economic disadvantage really does determine who has access to safety. So I'm going to ask you to bring up your visions of safety right now. And first, this is an example of what's called the social ecological model. So by a raise a hand, a yes or a plus or something in the chat, who's familiar with this kind of diagram? Got a few hands. Yeah. Lots of hands. Okay, great. So really briefly, this talks about, well, it helps kind of break down that statement I've been talking about, that anyone can experience intimate partner violence at the individual level, but not everyone can access safety. What this shows is that we are all individuals, we have beliefs, attitudes, do things, but we live in partnership, we have relationships, families, we live and work in communities, we attend and are part of different institutions, and all of that is rooted in the neighborhoods, the communities, the states, the country that we live in. They all interact with one another. And it also helps us see, you know, we pay a lot of attention to what survivors can do to get safe and how we maximize what individual survivors. We don't always pay attention, and oftentimes do that without changing much of what the policies, systems, services allow for, or think about how to change economic conditions or opportunities so that what survivors or any of us do work in the ways or create the safety that we're seeking. So you all are experts in this. Wanting your help here with a quick brainstorm. Let's look at these different layers. What are some individual or relationship factors that put people, quote unquote, at risk of intimate partner violence? What are some things that you address, that you hear about, that you train about? Citizenship status, yes. Which is an interesting one because that actually touches very directly to structural factors. Yeah, growing up in an abusive household, so having whether or not we've experienced violence, religion, access to resources.
Education. Amount of education.
Education, yes. Thank you. Exactly. This is ripped directly from the CDC's website on their kind of main page about domestic violence. And so all of these kind of are linked to individual beliefs, knowledge, skills, experience with violence, education level, how we believe we should behave or have relationships, things like that. So based on your work and what you do, are there limitations to only addressing some of these factors? I see financial security, which sort of points to that addressing these alone, like I said, may not change the ways that we can move or navigate or make decisions, choices in the world. So a lot of you have brought some of these up already. What are some community or broader social or structural factors that may create risk of violence? Or maybe more broadly, what puts safety out of reach? Right, being isolated. That isolation could be, you know, because you're in a rural area. It could be because of how neighborhoods are designed, where you can live and who you relate to. I'm seeing someone react to the question that I asked, which is great, that limitations in focusing on housing needs, which can be reactive and not proactive, right? Racism is a structural factor, right, which isn't only how people behave and treat individuals, but shows up in our policies. Distrust of law enforcement. Great. So again, these are just a handful, lack of support, a handful of what the CDC offers. So when we think about community and social structural factors, there are things like poverty, education, unemployment. Someone mentioned this, lack of support, community support, and what that looks like and how neighborhoods and our communities make that possible. At an even higher level, it's things like our policies. Are they weak? Are they strong? And norms. A lot of these are things that you all have already said. Great. And how they all connect. And so when we looked at this, at kind of how all of these factors work together, we were really focused on these community and structural factors. And we know that, again, while it can be hard to get data on survivor-specific experience on all of these factors, because they touch nearly every part of our lives, there is data that points to do our states, do our communities have these policies, have these outcomes like poverty, education, who has access to them, and what does that mean in terms of safety? And I did see a note here. Thanks for being part of the group. Yeah, if we want you to talk also if you are doing other work, if you could mute yourself and then come off mute when you're trying to engage, that would be wonderful. So thanks for helping us out there. So this leads to the final point, that we can see these inequities in data, even when the data isn't about survivors. This is one place that we went to. This work is based on Kristen Beyer and colleagues. They did one of the first meta-analyses of research looking at the association between neighborhood and macro level factors and rates of intimate partner violence, which means they looked at a ton of different studies to see what they said. And the studies span from 1995 to 2015. They were US as well as global studies. And they were meant to kind of look at what factors do influence intimate partner violence, or to us, how does that create the safety structure, what safety is available. So these are the 5 key areas that they found had factors associated with increased intimate partner violence. And the most frequent was the demographic and socioeconomic makeup of communities, the presence of social disadvantage, other crime and violence, factors related to women's empowerment, and available or not available structural and other geographic barriers. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these, and Portia is really going to talk more specifically about how we turn this, along with the ripple effect, into identifying specific data that we, how we pulled some of these data points into our dashboard. But you can see here again, factors like poverty, home ownership, proportion, how communities, the demographics of communities, social disadvantage includes things like concentrated poverty, residential mobility, community cohesion, which some of you already mentioned. And so this points to kind of gives evidence to the different kinds of data available. Data available on issues of poverty, for example, can be gathered differently than on community norms, where you may have to survey a community or talk to survivors or community members. So our ability to gather data that represents all 50 states on survivor issues is limited, but we can find some data that at least gives us a baseline of what concentrated disadvantage looks like, so that you all can fill in some of the texture and nuance with what you know about your communities to make sense of where inequities lie and what should be done differently. There's crime and violence data that comes from institutions which have their own limitations. And there's not even, it's not only just the mere prevalence of different forms of violence, but how communities perceive that violence and what their outcomes are. I think somebody mentioned that interaction with police or with different systems and who it benefits and who it harms. Women's empowerment, factors related to women's empowerment have to do with whether all people have similar access to financial systems, as well as education, labor, and other systems and opportunities. And then, of course, looking at geographic and structural barriers. So the rural versus urban, where resources are located, are there different regional differences? Where are different services and structures located? All of these things matter, and all of these things can be found in data. Here are some of the data sources that I mentioned that can be tapped into these different factors to identify and help paint the picture of what an equity within those areas might look like. So that brings us back to this point that safety is a structural inequity, and that's how we connected to it via the economic ripple effect and attaching structural issues to survivors' lived economic realities. And we know that there is data that can illuminate it and can be helpful, not, again, not in putting the focus on what survivors do with limited resources, but how safety is built in our states. And that's what we wanted to gather data, and knew that there was data available to illustrate that at some level. And with that, but not only with data, we can start to change that. And we know how powerful data can be as part of our change-making strategy. So all of that led us to build our survivor economic equity dashboard with the purpose that we could equip ourselves and you and together in the field with data to start to shift and fuel our advocacy towards systems and policy change, and point out to decision makers and policy makers that it's about the safety landscapes that are available not only for survivors, but the larger communities that they are a part of in our communities and states. And who did we build this for? We built it for both statewide domestic and sexual violence coalitions, but also small C coalitions and partnerships trying to create change, for direct and policy advocates in gender-based violence, but also in allied issue areas to kind of put a safety lens on economic environments and opportunity. And it's even useful for funders and other decision makers so that they can start to learn where their dollars or where the decisions that they make can have an impact in disparaging ways or in ways that advance equity. And we designed it in 3 different parts. These 3 maps will really be focusing on map 2, diving into the safety landscapes, and map 3 is really what our future looks like and how we can overlay connect outcomes and access to policies we know matter to survivors, and we hope to engage all of you in that in the years, months, and years to come. And with that, that's sort of an overview of kind of how we got to identify the data, and Portia's going to talk us through a little bit more what that data means, what it doesn't mean, what the limitations of it are, and then what we pulled into our dashboard. So I'm going to hand it to Portia, but before we dive in, are there questions about that? Does that resonate with kind of how you see safety and inequity? Resonating, great. If you have your own story or experience or data of how you kind of make the connection between the individuals that you serve and kind of, again, how safety is built and made available, I'd love to hear that in the chat. So Thank you. And I'll hand it to Portia to dig even deeper.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So as, sorry, if someone wouldn't mind muting, I think I hear a little echo. It could be my mic, but so Sarah's already sort of set the stage. The safety landscape dashboards incorporate a wide range of data sources that are, and are attempting to be as comprehensive as possible, but we also, of course, want to lift up like the caveats about the data. Like, as we know, the amount of primary source data collected from survivors is limited, and that we're focusing on sort of a 30,000-foot view of structural risk of inequity and structural factors that are linked to IPV. So we're making some generalized assumptions about the predictors of IPV and risk to survivors, and understand that the data might not always accurately represent every survivor's unique experience, but we're trying to make sort of data informed assumptions. And, again, no data set is perfect. And of course, there are also gaps in these data that are due to systematic factors as well, like structural systematic racism. There may be patriarchal oppression and other forms of oppression that mean for marginalized groups, there are less robust sets of data. And so, we try to be mindful of that and not place the blame or burden on those groups because we don't have as much data, but that's something, in future, we would like to, in partnership with others, make more robust. And so just to name where some of that data is limited, is particularly limited for Indigenous communities, immigrants, the LGBTQ and trans and non-binary communities. And so we also are planning to create a document or maybe like a mini dashboard that will illustrate where we do have data that you can disaggregate by based on demographic and other communities. So with that, we're going to move on and start to kind of deep dive into the largest source of our data, and after I cover like where they're coming from. And as you can, in this slide, there's just a high level overview of the general sources. So we have incorporated data that's collected by the government, data that are collected by nonprofits and research institutions and organizations, and then there's a limited amount of data that were collected from survivors directly. Next slide, please. So at a high level, and again, we'll return to at least the most major source. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat or just come off mute. Just to highlight again where some of the sources that speak to the issues, some of these issues are raised sort of in the kickoff as well on certain data that were available. So we have demographic data that's coming from the census, some of that's coming from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, among other places. There's also the Bureau of Labor Statistics and in terms of economic and labor, but there's also some demographic data. They kind of share that as well. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is another source. For education data, we've a source from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, so HUD. We are also using for family and child well-being, again, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Center for Disease Control, and that also flows into the health dashboard, a lot of CDC data, a lot of census data. For housing, again, the National Alliance to End Homelessness and HUD. So for some of our legal data sources, the U.S. Bankruptcy Court data, and then for physical violence and safety, the National Network to End Domestic Violence is another source that we used. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of dive into and explore U.S. Census data, that we previously identified, and some of the factors that can be correlated with IPV. And part of why we're highlighting this sort of as one of the major sources is there's a vast amount of data to wade through a census. So just to kind of lift up like what's available how you get access to it as well. So next slide, please. So I'm sure many of us, or most of us, are familiar with census, and it's kind of, census is I think, synonymous with the decennial census that we have all probably been pinged for, and but the Census Bureau is actually responsible for a number of census and surveys. So, for instance, they conduct, the decennial census is known as also the population and housing census that is conducted every 10 years, and it's like mandated in the Constitution. Again, there's been iterations of the census, and we know it's originally didn't, count enslaved people or name them, and so there's a lot of iterations where there's structural racism and other aspects that are built in. Census has been working in the past few years to expand its questionnaire and its definitions of race and ethnicity and sexuality and other questions. And so they put out a Federal Register notice, I think it might have been with OMB actually, to source proposals for updating the race and ethnicity statistical standards. So I can share that link, but there are things that they're proposing, for instance, including a new checkbox for Middle Eastern and North African. I think in the past, folks have had to code themselves as white because there was no box, or some other ethnicity, to really try to expand the categories and not really and allow people to express their identity fully. They are asking for suggestions, for instance, on how to code Black Americans in different terms, such as American descendants of slavery, American freedmen, and things like that. So I think it's worth checking into and commenting on if you have time. So again, decennial census is the U.S. Census Bureau's sort of most well-known product or output. But again, there are other census and surveys that they conduct. So there's an economic census that's conducted every 5 years. There's a government census. And then there's all these surveys that they do. I think there's something like 130 surveys that they conduct. And one of the biggest is the American Community Survey. And that replaced a long form census that was last conducted in 2000. And the Census Bureau was like, okay, we have to do something sort of in the intervening years between the decennial. And that would give us sort of a detailed information on population and housing characteristics. So this is the ACS, which kind of comes in two flavors, if you will. There's a 1 year and a 5 year, and there's variations in the populations that census samples for the two and the time span. So the 1 year is 12 months of data that's collected for populations of 65,000 plus, and then the 5 years over 60 months of collection. So, they have their different sort of pros and cons, but the 1 year is going to provide you with the most current data. There's a number of characteristics that and information that they're collecting in these surveys. So there's the social characteristics that include like education and marital status, relationships, economic characteristics such as income, employment, occupation, like even things like commuting to work. There are housing characteristics such as occupancy and structure, housing value and cost, utilities, like demographic characteristics like sex and age and race. And so there's an extensive list, and I'll show some demonstration tools that kind of give you a broad overview of what is contained in each of these surveys. Next slide, please. I think I've covered some of these, but some other data that are available. Again, the economic census, so it's kind of economic and business data, and much of these data go down to county level, but even further down to census blocks and tracts. So if you won't get into how those sort of geographic divisions are made, but they do get very, very detailed. There's the health insurance statistics, poverty statistics, so the current population survey, which is, again, another very useful survey that Census conducts. So with that, I'm kind of switch gears a little bit to how we can access the data from Census. And I think I'll have to grab the Zoom if I can.
All right, I'll stop sharing so that you can take over.
Thank you. Many screens, so let me just make sure. Can everybody see the slide? It should say navigating data at census.gov. Okay, thank you. So Census has, it can be, speaking as a former federal employee, like it can be tough to access some of this data through the government's tools. Like they're not always well designed or accessible. And Census has made some effort in the past few years to kind of redesign its website and make things more intuitive and easier for people to access. So there are a couple of different ways that you can kind of get this data. You can access it directly from their website. If you're being fancy, you can use their API. And so, and they have some publicly available data and things like BigQuery, a data warehouse products from Google. So it's out there, but again, it's not always, again, the best format or the easiest to get to. So one of the first tools I would recommend if you're kind of like, okay, I have a question about, this indicator or I'm looking for this particular data is the Census Survey Explorer tool.
Yes.
Sorry, could someone please mute themselves? I think, let me go back a slide.
Yeah.
And so I will just, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. So let me know if you're all able to see the Census Survey Explorer tool here. Okay, great. So as you can see, it's having some technical difficulties. So I don't know how well it's working. I saw this the other day. I was hoping it was kind of back at 100%, but it looks like they're still working on it. But you can search, using a keyword, and it will return, relevant survey products. Again, I'm not actually sure if it's working right now, but just to kind of give you an idea of how it should work. What's also really, really neat is they list all of the census output here, so you can just like at a glance, so okay, here's the frequency of this particular survey. It's covering these geographies. These are the topics that are included. Here are the subtopics. And I think they include every product, and when it started, if it's discontinued. So that's super useful. And so that would be sort of stop number one if you're just kind of diving in, because there's so much there, and it can be a lot. So now I just want to kind of demonstrate like how, if you have identified like a particular data set that you want, how you can get to it using data.census.gov. So there are, say we wanted to look for households with own children of a household under 18 using data.census.gov. There are a couple of ways to do this and kind of slice and dice it, but there are some links on the right that kind of give you direct links to all of the tables. But again, there's so many, it's best to kind of narrow down what you're looking for initially. So you can use these to kind of jump right in and kind of customize what you're looking for. But as you can see in this little demonstration here on the website, you can start by like typing in something you're looking for. So it's households and children, and I'm going to look in Mississippi. So I start kind of typing that in, and it will add automatically to this left side pane here, filters. So you can see it kind of gave me a summary here in the center of under 18 years old in Mississippi, like here, there's 23%, and this is from the source from the 2022 American Community Survey, the 1-year estimates. Then it also lists a ton of tables. There are 92 tables, so you can kind of sort through those and try to find what you're looking for. If you know specifically the table that you want, and I recommend, like, you know, maybe starting with the year, so you can filter and say, okay, I'm looking for 2020. And we already have Mississippi, so we don't need to worry about narrowing down the geography. You can look for a particular survey, which is also nice. So it kind of narrows it down for you and says, okay, like, we know, like, this information is going to be in ACS and the 5-year estimate. And then probably in the detailed table. So then again, it gives you like this whole list of tables. And if you happen to know, like, the table itself, and sorry. You could just type in the table name, which is also handy. So I can say I'm looking for S1101, and then it gives me the survey with all of the years. And in this case, I was going to look at 20. And then the table here on the right side, which I'll kind of collapse that because it will take up a lot of space. But then I can find, okay, here are the households with own children of the household are under 18. And now this is for the entire United States, but again, I can add in the state that I'm looking for. You will have these really wide sort of multi-hierarchy tables that can be a little unwieldy. So you can export them as an Excel or a CSV or zip file. You can transpose the data, so you can change the shape of the table depending on what you need. But this is just to illustrate, yeah, there's a lot here, and you know, you can do a lot with it. It just takes some time to kind of shape it to maybe make it fit whatever function you might be looking for. So I think we were going to take a break here and then come back and kind of dive into how we would access the data sources that are in each dashboard or the data elements, and then how we access those in the dashboard. So Sarah, what we're going to take what do you think, like
Yeah, let's take like a quick bio break, like 3-4 minutes, sing a song, and come back. And yeah, this is great. I think I don't know about you all before you go on the bio break, the census and the data that Portia kind of talked through is exactly why we built a dashboard, because it's super helpful and it's a great place to go if you're curious and you have time to dig into it. But as you saw, it's a lot. And so when we come back, we're going to walk through CSAJ's dashboard so you can see what we pulled into that, and hopefully that is a better starting place for you all. So yeah, quick 3-minute song, dance, and bio break, and we'll be back. Okay. I should have played a song during the break. Fun fact, well, embarrassing fact, the last song I liked in my Spotify was the Top Gun anthem. So I don't know what that says about me, but we can have a conversation about that another time. I hope folks got a good break or got to do a little musical wiggle. So we will start back.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. So before we move on, I know that I kind of whizzed through the census website and the data. I would love to hear from anyone if you want to put it in the chat or just come off mute. Like, has anyone tried accessing data from census directly? Was there anything that you were surprised that census was collecting and you're like, oh, I didn't know that they even asked people that? Or has anyone ever gotten like an ACS survey? Or I have never gotten one, but you know, like waiting for the day, but just curious. All right, maybe everyone's like, census website is too broken, so I don't even want to look at it. Which I
yeah,
understand.
Let us know in the chat, like, yeah, is it too much? Don't want to bother, or you're in it right now, multitasking, or kind of what's your experience with census or similar national data like that?
And it's okay.
Some folks are chatting, so
yeah.
yeah, I see that some folks are typing, so maybe it'll come in. But yeah, definitely share your experience with us. We're trying to also kind of build a community around how we use data, how we think about it. Portia, you mentioned earlier kind of both the limitations and how the census is trying to expand its definitions of some of the demographic factors like race and ethnicity. We also conduct our own research, and we've grappled with that and how to include and be inclusive and expansive, and also have like short and easy surveys and think about that. So there's a lot of work that we can do and learn together about how we capture information from people in meaningful ways and in ways that isn't just taking from, but involving all of us in the best way to do some of that. So we're interested in it on many, many levels.
Absolutely, and I think it's so powerful for folks who work in policy and advocacy and like really on the ground to be able to contribute their expertise to what, you know, census and other agencies are doing. So it's not just sort of a closed black box where, like, you know, the same folks are putting forward you know, ideas and proposals that we know don't work for everyone. So I think that's really powerful, but I'm gonna keep it moving here. So we've gone through the census and which is, you know, one of the major data sources. Oh,
sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I can't see your screen, so we might need to read.
Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry. Zoom doesn't like me a lot of the time, so I'll have to do it more than once, like when I'm sharing. Let me try this again. Sorry about that. Let me know if y'all are able to see this now. Like the whole time it's telling me you're sharing. Nope, just lying to me. Thank you. So, you know, we know all this data is out there. So you may be asking, okay, so like now we have these dashboards. What does that mean? So again, like there's a bunch of different data sources. It takes a lot of time to access this data and to standardize it and transform it. So really the power of these dashboards are that this data has been selected to reflect what we know are these key social and economic factors associated with ability to safety and then are linked to IPV. And it's all in one place. So you don't have to go to Census and then HUD and then, you know, the National Alliance and all of these places. Like it's already there, and it's really meant to speak to the work that, you know, everyone is doing. And then you know, it's also iterative. So it doesn't have to stop with what we've done. We can add on layers. And if we know that there are new data sets that we can incorporate, we can do that. So I think that's where it's like super powerful, and you know, you don't have to worry about, okay, well, the government is going to shut down, so then their websites won't work, you know, so then I can't get the data that I need, or something like that. So we're going to start with what is the sort of densest dashboard in the suite. Actually, I think I skipped a step. I wanted to show you how to access. I'm not sure if folks have already been to the website and gone through and maybe you know, played around with the dashboards a bit, but you can. Let me stop sharing here. If you visit CSAJ's website and under our work and the Survive for Economic Equity Data Dashboard, and I already have these open, so I won't like click through them, but it'll take you to this page, and it'll have the survivor equity maps, and then you'll want to select the safety landscapes, which will take you to this page that have all of the dashboards listed. I will say, if you're using them, just sort of a pro tip, like I've had this one open for a while, so I have the economic security dashboard open. So the first time you sort of start navigating through the filters, it may take a little while just to spin up, and it'll cache itself. But if it's been open for a while, we just suggest like refreshing it to make sure that it runs as quickly as it can. So let me return to this real quickly. So starting with the economic stability safety landscape, this is really, again, it's very dense, but it's like a 30,000 foot view of the indicators, you know, on this page. And as you can see, we have like a map of the entire country. So this is really to allow for a comparison between states. Like we don't have, unfortunately, regional data or down to county level data, because it's not available for every indicator that we have. But this is more of like that, again, that 30,000 foot view. So you can say, okay, how, you know, how does my state compare to other states, or just to kind of get a sense, so you can kind of roughly sketch out, you know, if you're trying to do some sort of regional comparison, or you can kind of start here. So when you're using the dashboard, you can see it's kind of segmented into different panes. There are these filters at the top. There are some definitions on the left side here. Again, the map in the center, some state-to-state comparisons on the right and the bottom. So you'll start, you know, with the drop-down menu to select your indicator at the top here. There are also some tooltips that you can use. You can hover, and I think those will show up in a later slide, but to give you descriptions about each of these indicators, just so, you know, kind of hit them so they doesn't clutter up the page. Again, you kind of go down the line, and the filters will adjust given what data are available. So if I'm selecting, you know, poverty rate, if there are subcategories associated, then it will show up. If not, it'll, you know, it'll display like there's no subcategory data for this particular indicator. And it'll also, you know, give you the appropriate year for the data available. If you hover over, again, some dashboard elements, so if I hover over state, it's going to give me the particular indicator number, and it should name that, and then what's available. And also like general demographic information about the state to kind of help place that in context as well. If you click on the state, it's going to drill down to a state level dashboard. And again, this is like when you just want to focus on your own state and not, you know, in comparison to other states. So it'll allow you to navigate that a little bit more efficiently. This page also includes the state level IPV chart, rate chart, and then again, the demographics in a little bit more detail. You know, we have segmented or disaggregated by you know, disability, gender, immigration status, and whether populations rule by age, and categories like that. And then if you want to go back to the overview, there is a button on the left side that says return to overview, and that'll take you back to the first page. And then you can also change your state. Sorry, I meant to mention, you can change your state using this drop down that's right above, like the image of the state. Oh yeah, so this is just a quick summary of what's in every dashboard, and just kind of giving an overview of how to navigate the dashboards. They all work pretty similarly, like the structure is the same, just different data. You know, so we have these 6 that cover economic security, the education and employment, the family and the child well-being, housing equity, physical and mental health, and then the physical safety landscapes. And again, as I mentioned, the economic security landscape is really the densest dashboard. It has the most indicators and sort of the widest ranging scope. So I'm going to go through all of the indicators just so we kind of know what lives where. Under the concentrated disadvantage score category, there is a consumer disadvantage score, households with cash and public assistance income, population female householder, no spouse present, with children under 18, population non-white, poverty rate and employment rate. And we've also highlighted where these indicators can be disaggregated. So that should come up on our next slide. So you can, and then we're looking at how to, we have some documentation, but how to make it even clearer, like where categories that could be further disaggregated by where that all lives. And so then we have a consumer burden.
Portia, if you don't mind going back to the previous slide to connect it to what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, the concentrated disadvantage. So this links back to what we were talking about with like macro level factors associated with increased rates of intimate partner violence. So this provides both a score of what researchers call concentrated disadvantage, which kind of ranks states based on the statistic and then averages that rank. And then these indicators, like on like poverty, income, etc., are the component parts that create the score. So all of these are kind of the main factors that researchers in that study and other studies have kind of examined and make up some of the broadest categories that point to whether or not there's concentrated disadvantage in the state. So the higher the concentrated disadvantage, the harder it is to find safety overall, and likely that there are more inequities within that state. So that score should also kind of be related to rates of domestic violence, especially in your state. And so this is a nice kind of starting off point to be painting and talking about the landscape of safety in your state, even though these are pretty broad categories. So I just wanted to connect it back to that summary of data that I was giving earlier and how they're showing up in the different kind of categories and groups of data that we're offering in the dashboard.
Yes, absolutely. So I will, sorry, I'm going to kind of go through these for time. But again, all of this information is available in the dashboard documentation. There are some consumer burden indicators that have, percent of with any debt, credit card debt, home debt, vehicle debt, bankruptcy and filings, consumer collections, falling behind on bills, medium debt, payday lenders. And again, where things can be, I think that can be skipped. But there's the economic indicator that has median net wealth, median income, whether or not someone has a checking account, whether they experience difficulty paying for household expenses, and then, categories that can be indicators that have disaggregable factors. Moving on to housing, equity, and landscape, I will pause briefly in case anybody has any questions. I'm sorry, I need to monitor the chat, but.
Yeah, any questions about the data that's included.
All right, thanks. Hope that's clear. So the housing equity landscape, which covers housing accessibility and long-term housing stability in each state. Again, there's access and outcome variables. Slide. Sorry that I got a little cluttered. There should be another slide, but there's median rent, 1 day request for housing and shelter. Renters are paying over 30% of their income. Eviction filings, foreclosure rate, self-reported likely eviction in the next 2 months, and a few other indicators. And these are ways that they can be disaggregated. Moving on to the family and child well-being, and this covers access to child care, child protection, family-related resources. So there, and again, they're broken, segmented by access and outcomes. And access includes things like annual child care costs, child population, whether someone claimed and received a 21 child tax credit, child support cases, domestic relations caseloads. Outcomes include things like child maltreatment, removal rate, children below the poverty level, and food insecure households with children. And those can be broken down, you know, in these different variables here by, you know, case type, you know, whether there's the total caseload with order established depending on the indicator. And then there are some breakdowns by race and ethnicity and also other populations. So, you know, folks with disabilities, you know, LGB, non-hetero populations, transgendered, whether or not someone's receiving SNAP. So those elements are also there for some of the indicators. They'll just touch on education and employment quickly, and that includes education and employment opportunities and protections in each state. So again, access and outcome are how they're segmented. We have high school graduate or higher, whether, you know, someone's received unemployment insurance since 2002, the U visa approval rate, and then outcome, unemployment rate, and working low wage jobs. And then those are also segmented in some cases by some of the categories that we mentioned before. And then looking at the physical and mental health landscape, which covers access to healthcare and health outcomes of each state. Again, we have our access and outcomes, and those include things like having health insurance, if you have medical debt, outcome includes IPV, survivor with self-reported health issues, the maternal mortality rate, IPV survivor with any diagnosed health condition, women who report fair or poor health status, women who report an average number of poor mental health days in the last 30 days. And then how these can be broken down by race and ethnicity and other categories. And then with folks with a history of IPV and folks with no history of IPV, and some of the indicators. So with that, I think we'll pause for questions or any discussion, and I can do a live demo of the dashboards. I know I was going through slides, so wonder if anybody had any feedback. Oh, live demo. Okay.
Demo would be great. Yeah, and if others have questions, take the time now to think of them and share them in the chat. We've gotten a few from registration we can throw out there too to get the party started.
And these dashboards, you can export pieces of the dashboard, which is cool. So once you navigate to the page, you know, it's embedded in the web page, but if you want to see it full screen, so down here at the bottom, there's a toolbar sorts. You can click on the full screen, which is to the right hand corner at the bottom. So that will enlarge the dashboard. I know there's a lot here, so I think this is a good way to view it. So we're looking at the safety landscape housing dashboard. And again, we have these filters at the top and these tooltips, which give you a sense of what is covered under each of these filters. So if I wanted to look at under the access indicator type, and then flowing from that, the housing indicators, the one day we're closed for shelter and housing, I can click on that filter. And again, it sometimes takes a little bit to move. Let me actually go back to median rent. I'll just stay where I was just to give you an idea. But so there's no, there's only race and ethnicity that is a subcategory. But we can look at the Asian alone category, and you'll see we don't have data for every state sometimes, depending on the indicator or the category, but we do for most states in this case. So you can see if you hover like the median rent, then for if we're looking at, again, we're using the census race and ethnicity category, so Asian alone in Missouri for 2021 would be $1,050. And you can get a sense, okay, for what's the total population of the state and how many, and what percentage of that is, categorized as Asian alone. And you can kind of see how the states are kind of grouped together here. So where we see that median rent is lower, looks like, places like Iowa and Kansas, and so some places out west and Midwest, some in the South. And where median rent is higher, places that you might expect, like California, Massachusetts, places in the Northeast, DC. So it can be interesting. You can also display sort of a top to bottom ranking of the states on this side, and you can choose how many states you want to display. But again, if I wanted to kind of see, because maybe the bubbles are overlapping, I can't really tell like what states are out there. I can rank them and see, the state with the lowest median rent, and those top 10 states with the lowest median rent, and then, or I could see the top 10 from the other direction, if that makes sense. And then if I wanted to, where was I? Going back to Missouri, drill down to Missouri. I can then review this sort of in concert with the IPV rates for that state and then that particular demographic. So we were looking sort of at Asian alone, and we don't have data in this case, but if data are available, then you can review. So we do have data for the last one here. So so we can kind of paint that picture where we're looking at all these structural factors that are linked to IPV, and then like what the reality on the ground in terms of like the census data is telling us about what people are experiencing. Again, making sort of these broad assumptions. If you want to, actually, turned off. There's usually a way to export, but it may be not enabled, or maybe because I have it full screen. Okay, here we go. So if I wanted to, for example, they have an export of a particular image or chart from the dashboard, you can do that at the bottom. The dashboard, it's just button doesn't show up in full screen. But there is a download button, so you can download an image or a PDF or a PowerPoint. So say if you need to use a particular chart in a report, and that way you don't have to screenshot it or something, you could just download it from the dashboard directly. So that's pretty handy. I will pause there in case I'm missing anything in the chat or any questions that the demo might have prompted for anybody Like, has anybody had a chance to kind of dig into the dashboard themselves? Was there anything that you noticed or that you found helpful, or any places that you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is a little challenging and could do this a little differently? I'd love to hear any feedback. All right.
And while
back
folks
here.
are thinking and typing, looking back to the demo you just gave, a question that comes up for me is, okay, so what do I do with this? So Portia was looking at median rent, and I know I saw from introductions that there are a lot of housing advocates. Folks are doing a lot of policy around housing. This data is broad, it's at the state level. Maybe you use the dashboard to look at what is median rent. Are there differences or disparities in kind of I think it was, you could look at that by race and ethnicity. So what are some differences there? Maybe you also look at median income or employment or some other factors that make a difference in kind of rent and housing. And then maybe you have your own data about rental assistance that you provide or what you think is needed to support survivors. So you can kind of put all of this together to kind of that inverted triangle from like big picture, the main stat, down to very specific stats and data that are needed and add in stories and what survivors need as a way to make an argument for perhaps the funding that you need, or if you are doing policy advocacy in that area, or simply to bring that data to a partnership meeting and say, here's the general broad landscape. So how can we use this to think differently, or to take a fresh look at what should housing look like for survivors that we work with, to come up with new visions of what that might be. So those are just a few ways that you can kind of add your own insights into it, and a few different ways that it can be useful. And we're actually going to walk through that and put that to practice next week when we come together. So yeah, questions. I know we threw a lot at you, and throwing a lot of data can be a lot. How are you feeling? What questions are coming up for you?
Can everyone still see my screen as well? Is it showing up? Okay, perfect. I will say that for part 2, we'll have a lot of sort of interactive use of the dashboard. So are folks excited about really being able to jump in there? All right, well, I'm going to kind of get us to set the stage for actually part 2, which again, we're going to be like kind of diving into, using the dashboard ourselves a bit more. So I think it's important to, again, because there is so much data, to kind of hone in on like the questions that you're trying to answer. And, what policy or program that or change that you're trying to inform, so that you can really come up with a roadmap for using the data that are available. So, for example, some of the questions that folks shared with us last time are things like, they would like to see data at the intersection of HIV and survivors in order to see how that could be applied to addressing housing needs. So, we have the whole dashboard that addresses, that contains data related to housing that you could dive into to kind of help figure out where there are vulnerable communities that we know that maybe are impacted heavily by HIV, and then say, okay, we should probably focus efforts on this particular community and HIV-related housing. I think one good example, or another example, let me see if I can open this window. Are y'all able to see this report? There's Black women in the wage gap. Okay. So this is the report by the National Partnership for Women and Families, where, again, they've used census data to analyze the wage gap in 25 states between Black women and, white non-Hispanic men. And it's just like a 4-pager, but it's, I think, very powerful and speaking to, they're making the points like how does the wage gap harm Black women? So they talk about, Black women having less money to support themselves and their family or to invest, so that impacts like, generational wealth and folks being able to go to college, having less money to spend on goods and services. And then, they're advocating for eliminating that wage gap and how that would impact Black women. So again, this is just an example of, I think, how this data can be transformed. And, it's not like a 20-page paper or anything. It's just like a quick 4-pager. Like, okay, these are the inequities that we found using the data, and this is what we're advocating for. So just figuring that out sort of as an example. So again, this is in preparation for part 2. Just want to get everybody thinking about, those particular questions you wanting to answer, using the data in the dashboards, and then, if it's, not available, like what else can we add?
Great. I'm seeing a few things in the chat. Awesome. Thank you. So that in general, yes, getting some confirmation or affirmation that the dashboard can be useful to kind of, like that 4-page report, kind of put data at your fingertips where you can kind of explain or describe the inequities. Folks are looking at the intersection of HIV and housing, wanting to see where funds make a difference. So that brings up a good point. In the future, we'd love to do kind of more dashboards on funding streams and where those dollars are going, so we can really look at housing access and outcomes, for example, next to where dollars related to housing are going. So that would be a great thing to explore further. Someone is talking about unemployment insurance that right now isn't getting any traction. I'm looking forward to finding more data to build the case. Great, yeah. So how can the dashboard help you build the case for kind of what the realities are? And I will say, and Portia has already said this, that the data may not provide the quote unquote answer, but it may help be a start, like a launch pad. So you find data on employment, unemployment, wages, things related to that. It might help you ask the question that you need, where you can find that data more easily elsewhere and add that to the mix. The relationship between coercive control resulting in lost financial credibility. That's an incredible thing to be looking at. In map 1, which is a little different than the maps Portia was looking through, there's a dashboard on the landscape of violence, and it does show statistics not only for physical domestic violence and sexual assault, but coercive control and a few other measures of intimate partner violence. And we know that economic abuse, the definition of that, was built off of kind of the phenomenon of coercive control. So that can kind of work as a proxy in some ways. So there is data where you can look at and find and show data on coercive control, and also look at housing. We've heard from some immigration partners of ours that looking at the mix of mental health, access to health care, and housing were particularly important for immigrant communities they were working with. And so what would make those things, what's the vision there, and what data is available to support that? These are great examples, so thanks. We're gonna hold on to these and bring them back next time. We're 2 over the hour, so I wanna let folks go. I just dropped in the link to the chat, but here's a little look at what we are gonna do. And so our ask is for you to start looking through the dashboard. You may have ideas in your head already, like coercive control or housing or unemployment, and you want to look through those dashboards. Or maybe you want to peruse all the dashboards and use them to identify at least 3 areas where you see safety is limited or inequitable in your state. And try to bring those next week, and we're going to do some breakouts and some more hands-on work with the dashboard to really figure out how data can help us explain these inequities and how we might use them to argue for different changes and build them, make the case for your policy priorities, build them into our strategies for change, etc. So let us know how you felt about this webinar via that link. And there's also a lot of space for you to give us some feedback on data you'd like to see, other things that you need. We're also planning our future work and how we can best support you in using this dashboard going forward. So thank you. Portia, any final words, final thoughts from the audience?
Yeah, thank you everyone for kind of going through this data journey with us, and I hope folks will be able to join us next time. And like you said, we're really going to kind of get our hands dirty down in the dashboards and the data. So looking forward to it.
All right, cool. Thanks, I appreciate you. All right, bye. Sorry.
Hi, can you confirm I'm clear? This is your cart provider. Can you hear me? Can you confirm?